Okay. So basically what we're gonna do is on the left side, I have the curriculum. On the right side, I have the VS Code where I'll be conducting the lecture today. And as we can see, here's day 5. If I open up day 5, I see the lesson from yesterday's backend APIs. And here an example, well, that's where I have a working example of everything. I have a .env file here because I was the one who created this. On your side, you will not have a .env file, so keep the one that you created yesterday. All right, so after that, I'll go ahead and just select the apps that I need. I don't need the .env. I am gonna need the ignore. After that, I'll simply just copy, come over here, and paste. We can see everything kind of gets pasted there. Okay. So that's it as far as moving my apps or but now my database is going to look a bit different, or it could look a bit different. So instead I'm going to do drop db pokédex underscore db, and actually let me open this up so that everybody can see that properly. That should drop the database altogether. Unless something's using it, which it looks like something is. Yep, there's one other session utilizing it. Got it. Okay, so now I run the command again. It runs smoothly. That drops my database. So now I can create the database again. So create db pokédex underscore db. Okay, that created my database. So now finally the final step will be Python manage py and then migrate. So we can see all my migrations happen. And then the last thing I need is just to ensure that my fixtures are loaded. Currently in the Move app, I have a fixtures named Move Data, and in the Pokemon app, I have fixtures named Pokemon Data. So now I can say Python manage py load data, and then I can specify which one it is that I want to install first. So I'm going to say Pokemon data.json. We can see that it installed 4 fixtures. So next I'll run the command again, Python manage py. And instead of the Pokemon data, well, I'm just going to do move data. So move underscore data. And interesting. Oh, moves underscore data. I did a plural, not. There you go. Okay, so now I installed one fixture, one object from one fixture. Now, if I look at my database and I want to confirm, if I can say PSQL Pokédex underscore db, and I can say select all from move. That's going to show me psychic. That's what I expected. That's the one thing that I have in my fixture. And then I can say select all from Pokemon. And that's going to show me 4 Pokemon. And that's exactly what I expected because that's what I have on my fixture. Okay, so after I made those migrations and got all those installed, I should be able to just run the server. And the server's running correctly. That means I was able to conduct all the steps and everything's good to go. If any of these steps failed, it's likely because of the way we named the secret keys. So just go over to your Pokemon project, go in settings, check the way that the key is named. So here we see it's Django key in all capital letters. That's why it's matching to that .env file. And then I can also go over to my API views where it's the other place where I reference, it's the only other place where I reference that env file, grabbing API key and secret key. And that's pretty much it as far as setup goes. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I'm starting from scratch, and I have 2 questions actually. Can you tell me how to run the requirements.txt so I can just do that all at once
Yeah.
instead of doing everything separately?
There you go. So for installing the requirements.txt, you would do pip Oh, well, actually, first you wanna, I apologize, wanna activate that virtual environment, so source, env, bin, and then activate. So that activates the virtual environment that I have here called env. Let me close all this up. And now the next thing that I want to do is I want to install my requirements from requirements.txt. So I'll say pip install requirements dot txt. And because it's a txt file, I'd say pip install -r to make it recursive. And then it installs each line of requirements.txt. So now when I press enter, we'll see it go through all the requirements. All of them are already installed, so it just says requirements already satisfied.
Okay, thank you. And then my only other question, so I had to make my own .env just now, and I don't have like the keys in there or anything.
Yeah,
I'm
that's a
not
really
sure
good
what to
question.
do for that.
So as far as the noun project keys, you could just go to the noun project and grab those. That would be the only way to grab those. Or you could grab the ones that I shared on Slack last night. We won't be utilizing the noun project today, so you could definitely just put some dummy string in there, and that will work for now. But let me grab you the code that will generate a new Django secret key. Okay, and then I'll open up the chat here. Okay, so that whole line is just one command that you can copy and paste into your terminal. And basically what that's doing, it's grabbing the Python that you have installed into pip, accessing the django.core.management.utils, and then it's importing a function called getRandomSecretKey. After that, it's going to print getRandomSecretKey. So you can paste it here. And you can see that your terminal will then print a random secret key. All this is doing is essentially just entering a Python shell and then running the command, the import statement. And after running that import statement, it's running the command print and calling the get random secret key method. And then giving you this key.
Okay, so I would still use the one out of my settings for the Django key, and then I could use like a dummy string for the API key and use that for the secret key, or is that supposed to be for the Django key?
The dummy string, that's only going to happen for the API key and the secret key. The Django key still needs to be the one from your project.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
So what is the difference between you did pip install requirements versus like pip freeze?
Got it. Yeah, so pip freeze will update my requirements txt. What pip freeze actually does is it goes inside of pip, grabs all of the things that are inside that I've installed in my current pip that's connected to this virtual environment, and it basically just dumps it. It's kind of like dump data, but instead you're just dumping the installments, what versions those installments were when we created those projects, which ones it is that we're utilizing to actually be able to create our project. So here we have Django REST framework, we have OAuth lib from yesterday, we see psychopg, binary, request, all that good stuff. So that's what pip freeze does. Pip freeze just dumps all of our installments inside one single file so that we can share it with other developers. Pip install -r is going to go into the requirements txt, and it's going to work recursively. So if we don't use -r, it's expecting everything to be in one line. But we can't do that whenever we're dealing with dumping our installments. Everything has to be on different lines. So we have to do -r so that it works recursively, meaning that it goes through line 1, finishes, goes over to line 2, 3, and so on until it hits the very bottom of the file. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So I accidentally did pip freeze instead of install just now, and now I'm not looking at the same thing that you are under requirements txt. Is that gonna
Right.
screw me up today?
Yeah, because you're gonna need all of these installments. So let me go ahead and send this on the chat as well. It's just basically everything that we've installed up to this point.
Okay, got it.
Is that a
Thank you.
Dunder Mifflin mug, Dave?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Any other questions?
What is the Tomley one? On line 17?
Oof, that's a good question. I honestly have no clue. It likely came with something else that I installed to make it like work. But I really don't know where that one came from.
Okay.
Did you have to create a new database? Sorry, I was like trying to catch up and missed that.
Yeah, I dropped the database and afterwards created it again. That way, if I had any dirty data from before, it wouldn't interfere with the project.
Sounds good.
Okay. No other questions?
So we should be seeing, if we do the \D, we should be seeing that whatever it was, the one of the Pokemon that you had put in there.
You should be running a select query to be able to see all the Pokemon that we put in there. But that happens after load data. Try to do load data for the fixtures.
No. Did not.
Yeah, I think
How,
for,
I'm sorry, how would I do that?
yeah, let's walk through it real quick. If you already did the I'm assuming you already created the database and it's empty right now. And so
Yeah.
the next thing would be to migrate, not make migrations, I apologize. You would just Python manage py migrate. For mine, it's going to say there's no migrations detected, but for yours, it'll start installing every single one of your migrations. Is that what's happening?
I'm getting like a weird, wait, it says model not found error, no model names .env, but
Okay, yeah, so it's referencing to the .env. Do you still have this?
let me see. I had to create a new environment. I think I'm starting completely from scratch. I wasn't following along the last few days.
Okay, yeah, so you could just
But-
create a new file called .env, and then you could utilize these keys for now to keep it simple and get everyone running.
Okay. Sorry, I'm holding everything up, but
No, of course not.
my code's a mess.
Can I see your settings file?
Of course. Which portion of my settings file? It's a hefty.
The secret key part and then up like where you have your import.
Our key should be the same as yours.
No,
Okay, thank you.
you could copy the same one, but typically you would have a unique key for each Django project. Or you could generate that get random key with the code that I sent earlier.
Okay, but if we're using the same one that we've been using, that should still work, right?
Right. All right.
I'm so sorry. One more time. Can I see your .env file?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And what was the code for loading fixtures?
Yeah, so now for loading fixtures, now, and actually I'm not gonna need this curriculum anymore, so let me get rid of that. Okay, so now for loading fixtures, I can take a look here. I know that my move app has a moves data fixtures. So I can say Python manage py load data, And then I can specify which fixture it is that I wanted to do it from. So I want moves underscore data dot JSON. When I do that, I'll see it installed one object from a fixture, which is what I expected. I can run the same code, but instead of move data, I want Pokemon data. And then when I run this, we can see that I've installed 4 other objects.
Yeah, I'm getting an error, no module named .env. So we learned how to import or what install that yesterday, right? And
Correct.
so I've done that like twice. So how do we do that?
It's going to be a pip install python -.env.
Python dash dot.
Yeah.
Python dash dot env.
Pip install python
dot env.
there.
Not dot, but dot. Got it.
All right, at this point, are there any other questions? I would prefer everybody to code along today. That way we could fix questions as they arise. So it would be helpful for everyone who has a working project. But if you decide not to code along, that's definitely up to you.
I'm still having issues with everything.
Okay, yeah, let's
Could
yeah, I
Go
was
ahead.
say let's let everyone go for a 10-minute break, and then while everyone goes on a 10-minute break, myself and Nick will stay behind, and then we'll just get your environment going. Does that work, Nick?
Yeah, it works.
Okay, perfect. So currently right now it's 8:55. Let's come back at 9:05 to start the lesson. All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about CRUDing. So CRUD is a concept that falls within APIs and pretty much any backend framework. And what CRUD stands for is going to be, and let me go ahead and start a README here so that I can just write this down. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about CRUD. And what CRUD stands for is basically we have our C, which stands for create. We have R, which stands for read. Ooh, an equal sign would have been better for that than the greater than sign, actually. Let me fix that. We also have the U, which stands for update. And then finally, we have D, which stands for delete. Okay, so now all of these applications, all these different types of functionalities are kind of linked to request. So let's talk about this a little bit. Right now, what we have been working on, or the current product that we have, has been concentrated around GET request, right? And a GET request, every time I send a GET request to my API, I'm receiving information that I'm able to read. So which one of these methods, right, or which one of these actions would correlate with the GET request?
Read.
Yeah, so it would correlate with read. So we can put here, this correlates with GET. What is going on? Okay. All right. So now I'm tracking that every single time I send a GET request to my server, I'm essentially expecting to receive some information that I can read, right? So let's talk about the social media app all over again. I go ahead and log on to Facebook, a GET request goes over to the server, and that server sends back all the information of all the different posts from my friends or any connections that I may have, right? Well, that's allowing me to read that information, and then all that information starts populating on my screen as we start seeing that the front end kind of takes over that information. Okay, so there's our GET request. Now, every type of request is also linked to a specific status. So far, when we're working with GET requests, the most common status that we see when it comes back successful is going to be a status of 200. That means that the request was successful And it's just an interchange of information. I'm sending a request, bringing me back information. All right. Now, update requests are gonna be the ones that we concentrate on today. So, in order to be able to update something, I make a post. Okay, that post gets created and it's online. When I click on the whatever it is, whether it's a little pencil or some sort of editing setting, something like that, when I click on edit and I rewrite something new on that post, and then I click on that green button saying, okay, I want to submit this, like this is the edited version that I want to be saved onto the database. Well, as soon as I click on that green button, a put request is sent to my server, and that put request is strictly dedicated to only updating information inside of my database. So here we're going to put request, and the status that put request correlates with, well, it's going to correlate with the status 200 if I'm sending back a body. So if response included, or a status 204 if there is no response included. All right, so then that raises the question, when would I ever want to update something and not notify the user that the update was successful, right? Well, that kind of goes into a couple of different things. So one, if the application, your front-end application and the back-end application are pretty much only controlled by your company or your team or whatever, and you know that everything is working properly, and you could utilize the status codes as a form of signifying success, well, this way we're not querying the database or trying to send back information over the response, and it's kind of lightening, making our response lighter, so that it doesn't put that much weight on the server, right? So I click on the response, and then that we are all familiar with that Axios request format already. So I go to Axios, I make my request, pings my backend, it comes back, I go into my .then method, right? Well, in my .then method, I can say if response.status is equal to 204 or response.status is equal to 200, then I can assume that the request was successful. So whatever behavior it is that I want my application to reflect, whether that's updating some type of specific division to have new content, I can just handle that on the front end. So if I could just send back the entire information if I wanted to, but that's just going to make the response a little heavier. Whereas if I sent back a 204, that's just letting my front end assume the response was successful, and then they can just update the information on their end so that I don't have to carry the weight on my back end. Okay, so we'll stop there for now, and we'll just talk about updating things and how that works. Well, let's see. Let's say I wanted to create a method, right? And in this method, I wanted to be able to update a couple of things. I want to be able to update the level of my Pokemon. So let's take a look at my models here, and so we can talk about it. Well, in my update method, I want to be able to alter the level of my Pokemon, right? And I know that I only want to alter that by level 1. I want to make sure that I can change the captured status of a Pokemon, and I can change the description of the Pokemon. We'll just keep it simple, and we'll just do those 3 fields for now. So I see that we have this level up method. We don't have, we have something to change the status, but we don't have something exactly for description. So we'll have to send that ourselves. All right. So now, if I think about that, right? If I go to write my path, so let's go inside the Pokemon app. Let's go to URLs. And what I want to do is I want to be able to update the level. I want to be able to update the captured status. And I also want to be able to update the description of this Pokemon. Okay, well, what would that look like in a path, right? If I try to go and put that in a path, well, it would say probably something along the lines of level, and then I would have to put an integer and then call this level so that I can pass it onto my my view controller. Then I would have to say whether it was captured or not, and I could maybe do a string method there and say captured. Finally, I can say description, And then I could do something like str description. Okay. So this alone isn't considering the fact that this is prepended by everything else that I did in my Pokemon app URLs, right? So what this URL would actually get interpreted to is it would look something like HTTPS or HTTP//1TA.0.001 at port 8000. And then after that, it will say API v1. Then I'll go into Pokemon. And then right after Pokemon, all of this would be added into that URL mark, right? And that looks pretty ridiculous. Not only that, but the user is able to grab the information from my URL. We don't necessarily want the user to have this sort of experience, right? So instead, what we want is we want to be able to give the Pokemon or the user of our API to have a way to just update the specific Pokemon. So currently right now, we already have this ID thing to be able to identify a Pokemon. So let's take a look at what that would look like. I'm going to comment this out. If I'm planning to only utilize this, well, if I go to the view, so where is my view here? If I go to the view for a Pokemon, we see that it's expecting to receive. We see that this expecting to receive an ID or name, and that will get us our Pokemon, right? But now I want to account for a put method. So let's go over that. So let's say def put. I'm going to go ahead and pass in self. I'm going to pass in the request and then the ID or name. And all this information is pretty much going to stay the same. We'll have to talk about the serializer here shortly after the lesson, so that we can all understand what exactly that is doing for us. So I'm going to grab this Pokemon variable, going to make it equal to none. If it's numeric, I'm going to go ahead and run a get request to match the ID. If it's not numeric, I'm going to assume that it's a string. So I'm going to run a get request to match it by the ID or name. Okay. And actually, I'm pretty sure that this should be by title here, but we'll see how that works here shortly. Okay. So that's working well. I'm able to send this request. Let's take a look at what that looks, how that looks. I'm going to open up Postman here. And I'm just going to grab that endpoint that I've created. So I'm going to go over to my URLs. I know I already made this before. And then basically, I'm just going to put an integer in this case to be able to grab a Pokemon. Well, if I send a get request, I'll probably want to run my server. I apologize. So let's see.
I think you added an extra slash somewhere in there.
Ooh, I like what did. Thank you. I did. All right, so I send my request. My request comes back with a status 500. I wonder what's going on. Okay, so integer object has no attribute named numeric. Okay.
Yeah, you can put inside the what it called str.
Say again?
You can the ID or name. You can put inside the str string, then open the parentheses and close the parentheses.
Yeah, so this is likely happening because I'm sending an actual integer, and then I'm asking if it's numeric, even though it's returning a number.
No, I mean
so maybe
to do like easy fix, you can just start with right in front of the ID, just start str open parentheses, ID or name, then close parentheses. That's it.
Could you specify that real quick?
Can you go back again to the views?
I think you're saying to
You-
just like typecast it.
Yeah, typecasting, right? Line 21.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Just temporary, like easy fix.
Right, just as a temporary fix. Got you. Thank you. Okay. So now that will recompile, and when I send this, I should receive one Pokemon. Okay, so I received my Pokemon. Its name is Blastoise. It has the ID of 3. It has a level of 37. So that works for my get request. But currently the one I'm working on is my put request. So let's go over to put. Okay, well, put does the same exact thing as of right now. But we want to change this behavior to actually be able to update my database now. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this. I'm going to start working on this. Well, just like we said, we wouldn't want to create a URL that looks ridiculous like this to be able to grab all that information and then treat it in my views. So instead, what we're going to start doing now is we're going to start sending information in the body of the request. All right. So if I go over to Axios, and then I'm sorry, not Axios, to Postman, I can see that I have my my URL here. And if I come over here, I see authorization, headers, and body. Well, today we're going to be working with body. And in body, what I want to ensure to send will be those 3 things that I wanted to be able to change. So now let's go ahead and open up a dictionary, because we know that JSON is the only type of information that is sent back and forth between server to front end. I mean, between front end to back end. So let's make a variable called level up. Let's just make that true. And this is JSON, so I should look at this. Okay, the next variable will be captured. I'm going to also make that true. And then the very last thing will be description.
You're working within raw, right?
Correct,
make sure.
yes. And then in this description, I'm just going to put something, I don't know. This is Blastoise, and he can learn Hydro Canyon, but it misses almost all of the time and ends in confusion. I haven't used Hydro Canyon in a while, so I don't know if that's necessarily true, but we'll see. All right, so now I created this JSON request, all right? And actually, let's bring back that response that I currently had. Now let's take a look at what request looks like. We haven't really experimented much with requests just as of now. So I built out this JSON body. I'm saying that this body is going to be included in this request. Let's send our put request. Everything comes back correctly and normal, just like we had before. But now if we look here, we can see that we're getting a REST framework request, where it's getting put into the API v1 Pokemon /3. Okay, so this tells me that there was a put request that was sent to this specific URL route. That's not really useful to me. And what I want to know is the body. So I wonder if I could do something like .body. Let's see what happens if I send this request. Okay, the request was successful. And when I look here, well, request.body has a binary string with a level up of true, captured of true, and description and all that good stuff. The description that I provided. It's coming back as a binary string. We could try to do the whole JSON.loads and all that good stuff. But because Django REST Frameworks is handling this request, they know that we're going to need this information to be something that I can manipulate in Python. So instead of accessing the body, I'm going to access something called request.data. And now when I send this request, if I come back over to Django, we can see a readable dictionary that gets printed into my console or my terminal, where I can see level up is true, captured is true, and I can see the remainder of my description. So now instead of writing out a whole URL path that has every single one of these arguments inside of the URL path, I'm passing a body into that request to be able to grab each individual element by iterating through the dictionary and making the changes that I need to. Okay, before I continue moving on with the lesson, does everyone understand why we're using request.data rather than using a URL path? And also, does everyone understand where we're at up to this point?
You lost me at typecast. My machine, whatever I'm doing isn't working. I've got if string ID or name dot is numeric, and it's not sending anything back through Postman.
Interesting. You're not getting anything at all? Like not a
getting a
500
500
error
error.
or anything?
I'm getting a
Okay.
500.
Got it. And when you come over to the terminal on Django, what do you see as the error?
It's saying int object has no attribute is numeric.
Yeah, so we added this line 21 here. Basically, we're reassigning the variable of ID or name to the string of ID or name so that we can run this function correctly on line 22.
Yeah, I have a similar thing and it's not working. I've got if string ID or name is numeric, and it's not. I don't know where it got stuck. I don't know enough to know what happened.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so everything after that was just a wash of me trying to figure it out.
Okay, let me go ahead and pause the recording and you can share your screen here. So these questions and answers. Okay. Yeah, so you're saying how did I convert it from binary to JSON? Well, it's just request coming back through Django or through Django REST frameworks when we're handling it as an API view from Django REST frameworks. It provides us both body and data. Dot body will give us the binary string, but because we're utilizing dot data, that's what gives us an actual JSON or something that Python can actually read and gives us a dictionary that's available to us.
Okay. You scroll down just a little bit on your code.
Of course.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I kind of miss what you were doing in Postman when you were like manually typing stuff in there. I was kind of in the same boat as Michael. Could you go over that again real quick, Francisco?
Yeah,
I was about to ask the same thing. Appreciate it.
of course. Yeah, so if I go over to Postman, I basically just copied and pasted the same URL that we had from before. I added the variable of 3 so that I can grab that specific Pokemon with the ID of 3. Came over to body, clicked on raw. You have to make sure that it's in JSON format. Then after that, you just open up a dictionary and actually type the JSON information in there.
So this is the data that we're going to be setting?
Yeah, so this is eventually the data that will go into my database.
Okay. Why are we typing it here into the body and the raw?
Yeah, so the only other way to get this information to go from the front end to the back end, or for users to be able to ping it through our API, would be to include it in the URL, right? And as we saw earlier, if I go over to the URL, if I try to do something like that, I would end up with something ridiculous like this, just extremely long. And rather than having it all kind of nice and without showing the user each individual parameter, it's just going to show this whole string. So instead, all I really need is the ID of the Pokemon I would like to update. And then after that, I could just handle everything through request.data. Does that make sense, Don?
Kinda. I guess eventually it would be part of the front end where you're wanting to update it to where, I mean, obviously your users ain't going to use Postman to update their Pokemon. So, but this is just a way for us to test it.
Yeah, so that brings up a really good point, right? So what would that look like from the front end as far as what I'm trying to do? Well, what I'm trying to actually do here would be something like axios.put, and then it would go over to whatever it is. So HTTP 128.0.0.1, and then /8000. All right, and then after that, I would say API /v1/Pokemon, And then the last one was 3. All right, and then right after that, I passed in some data. And in that data portion, what I have is level up is equal to true. What else did I have? I think I had captured is equal to true. And then the last one is the description, which I'm not going to write, but it basically, this is the description. So this is up to the part where we're working forward, that we've been able to interact with thus far. We've seen GET requests before, but now we're sending it through a PUT request and specifying the data that would go inside the body. Did that help connect the dots a little bit?
Yeah, I connected a few of them. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, let's continue pushing forward at this point. Oh,
Sorry,
we have a
I don't
question.
want to break the flow, but so you guys said the typecast right there is just a temporary fix. What would, you don't have to explain what the long term or do what the long term fix would be, but like what would that look like if you could explain it with words?
I just have to change this if statement saying if ID or name is equal to integer, then do this.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Okay, perfect. All right, so now we have this information. I can grab request.data, but let's grab each individual part of request.data. So let's grab the level up variable here, and let's make that equal to request.data, and let's use the .get method and say that I want to grab is level up. Okay, and then I'll print it just to see that we actually got it from the front end. Okay, so now here I have my PUT request. I see that I'm sending level up. I'm making it true. When I send the request, if I come back to my terminal, I can see the first thing being printed is the request.data itself. And then the second thing being printed is true, because I'm printing level up, and that's the value of true inside of my of level up inside of my request.data. All right, so now I'm grabbing information out of there. Now, another thing that we can experiment here, notice I'm utilizing the .get method instead of using the square brackets. Well, why would I want to do that? I just sent a request again without the level up variable. What do we think is going to show up on my terminal right now?
Kind of undefined.
Error.
Undefined, maybe.
Right. So we expect something like undefined or error, but instead we get something like none, because it wasn't in the PUT request. It's a dictionary. The key didn't exist, so it returned the value of none. Right. I can also give it a value to return if it's not in the dictionary. So now if I send this request, I should be able to see false. All right, we see false populate here because it doesn't exist. And if I come back over and change it back to where I want true to be in there and send the request, when I come back and I can see that because it is in the dictionary, it's giving me the value of true. And that's how you grab information from the request. So now let's go ahead and grab the rest of it.
Francisco, just I'm
yeah.
sorry, I'm trying to understand the big picture, right? So in the correct me if I'm wrong, in the Postman, we are writing in the PUT raw function area. What we're doing there is we're simulating user input on a web page on front end. So it's as if user modifies a web page or a form, and then PUT essentially travels back into our back end of our app on our server and is updating our database, right? So it's essentially direction without touching the Pokemon API. It is simply traveling from Postman into our application. Is that correct?
What do you mean by without touching the Pokemon API?
So the PUT request that we're making is simply from the Postman going backwards into our server, right, into our local server. It's not going up into the no information is being exchanged with the what's it called, pokeapi.com, correct?
That's correct. We shouldn't be touching the Poke API at all. We're making a clone of the Poke API.
Got it. So the get request does goes that way, but the put request, we're simply simulating user input the other way.
The get request does not touch the Poke API. The get request is going into our database and grabbing information from our database to be able to.
Got it. Thank you. I'm there
Of
now.
course.
I appreciate
Awesome. No problem. What
So-
does the false do in the statement? Just allows you to set the body, set the value without it being in the body. Yeah, that's an excellent question, Deepan. This dot get, right? It can take in two arguments. So one, the argument that I'm looking for, and we saw that if the argument that I'm looking for doesn't exist, it gives me back none. If I don't want it to return none, I can give it a value as a second argument to provide in the case that level up is not inside of the request. Does that answer
Sorry,
your
I
question?
missed that. Thank you.
Of course.
Why did you not use brackets?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Let's try that. Well, let's say I use brackets, right? And I say level up. Let me let it compile all here. And let's remove level up from there. Well, now if I send the request, we see that my request failed. All right, I'm getting a 500 internal server error. Well, let's take a look. What happened? Okay, so it's telling me that in line 30, I'm looking for level up, and it's giving me a key error and saying, hey, level up doesn't exist. Okay, so that's what's caused by the fact that I'm using the square brackets. But if I utilize the .get method, well, the .get method is going to check if it exists, and if it doesn't, it just gives me none for the value of level up. Does that answer your question, Roger?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I feel
And
like I
then
was
Kristen,
that happens.
got it. Why would there be a put in the front end and back end if the user is the one making a put request? Wouldn't it be in front end? So the put request is being sent by the front end user, but the way to handle that put request is happening by the back end. And that's why we have to call it DEF put to match the request. I'm not making another put request. I'm rather handling the put request that I received from the front end. Does that make sense, Kristen?
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, like, how are they connected?
Yeah. We'll definitely see that once we start doing the Axio stuff. But basically what this would look like, I'm sure you guys remember when we were working in the HTML and JavaScript section, right? And we did that form. For example, there was one that was like the guessing game. And then you use JavaScript to grab the information out of an input field, right? So these fields would technically be ran by JavaScript, where JavaScript would grab the information out of the input field and then place it inside of our request. So that when the user clicks on submit for the form, the put request is sent to my backend. And then my backend can make any changes accordingly and send back a response. So we haven't gone to the .then method just yet.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I feel like it was already answered, Francisco, but
Mhm.
the information that we are putting in Postman as raw data, like that's not being saved anywhere here, right? That we're just simulating what the user is requesting to do.
That's correct. Right now, we're just receiving the information from Postman through request.data. We haven't put anything into our database yet.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so now we have level up, we have request.data. We're able to get our level up method. So now let's grab the remainder of that. Let's grab the captured status. So that's going to be captured. It's request.data, .get, and I believe it's called captured. And then finally description, which is equal to request.data, .get, description. All right, so now I should be able to see all three of those things. So let's print them out real quick. Let's make this into an F string. Let's pull level up in a new line. We'll break it up so that we can see it a little bit better. We'll put captured. And in the new line, we'll put description. Okay. So now let's take a look at what that looks like. Let's bring back the level up variable in our request here. So currently my body of my request will have level up equal to true, captured at true, and description being whatever I wrote in here. I'm gonna send this put request. Everything went by successfully. When I come back here, first it prints out the entire request.data from line 29. Then it prints out true because I'm printing out level up. It's indenting 2 lines, prints out captured. And then it indents 2 lines to print out the description. So now I know I'm getting all the information correctly. This is exactly what I need to be able to make changes. And now I can actually make changes to my database. Well, let's see what that looks like here. I already have this Pokemon variable. And I know that these captured and level up variables are coming back with either true or false. So what I can say is if captured, then Pokemon dot level up. Right? And that's just essentially calling the level up method from Pokemon. Let's take a look at what that Pokemon method looks like. So Pokemon dot level up will access the self dot level, add 1 to it, and then save the model. So I don't have to worry about dot save either. And while we're here, we could take a look at the caught. We can see that it's accessing the captured, setting it to the opposite of whatever it is, and then returning, and then saving the model so that we don't have to worry about saving. Okay. So now I can say, I can move on to the, oh, I apologize. This should be if level up, not if captured. Okay. So now the next one could be if captured, then Pokemon dot capture status or change caught status. And again, all I'm doing is I'm checking if the request has the captured variable set to true. If it does, it will trigger this change status, this change caught status for that Pokemon. And then finally, I can grab the description. So I can say if description, then I can say Pokemon dot description is equal to description. And actually, I probably want to change this a little bit so that we can see it. Let's say from request description. Okay, so now I'm grabbing the description from the request, grabbing the Pokemon method. Be helpful to visualize the scope of this project if you set up a simple front end that queries this API, sending a pull request. I understand that, Kelvin, and that's a very good suggestion. But unfortunately, in order to be able to achieve that, we have to go over something called cores and a couple of other backend things that we haven't covered just yet and are a little bit out of scope. But that's a really good suggestion. All right. So now I can go to models.
I'm sorry, I missed it. What did you change the description again? I apologize.
Yeah, I just changed description to from request description so that I'm able to visualize it. Say again?
Why did you change it from description to that?
Yeah, the main reason why I changed it is because yesterday I kept naming variables after the same name that it related to the model. And I think it caused a little bit of confusion. So this is just to clarify that this description is strictly coming from the request, and it's not the same description that correlates the model object.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Of course. Yeah, no problem. All right. So now let's take a look at the mod.
So one quick question. If you change caught status, if it's true, is that going to make it false so it won't be caught anymore?
If it is currently true, it will make it false. Yes. And if it's false, it will make it true.
Okay.
Got it. All right. So now I can take a look at the model, look at this description. I don't have anything to update the description, but I'm changing it manually here. So in order for that to reflect in my database, what do I have to do to Pokemon?
Save it.
Yeah, I have to run the .save method, and that will save it onto my database. So now let's take a look at what that looks like. Everything in Postman remains the same. Nothing's really going to change when I send this request. But now we can see that the level of the Pokemon has changed a little bit. So let's go ahead and look in here. And let's grab this Pokemon specifically. So select all from Pokemon app.pokemon, where ID is equal to 3. Okay, so this shows me Blastoise. It is now level 38. We can see its captured status was now switched to true. It was false before. And now the description that I sent over in the request is implemented in my database. So now it says, this is Blastoise, and you can learn Hydro Canyon, but it misses, etc., etc. So I just made a change to my database now. And that's essentially what the put method is supposed to do. It's supposed to grab an object, make any changes to that object that I'm requesting. And then the last portion that we went over was what type of information it's supposed to send back, right? We said that we could either send back a body or we could send back an empty request with a status of 204. So now we're going to get into something called statuses. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the body of that response. And I'm going to pass in the status argument. Okay, well, what I want to return is a status of 204. But where do I grab that from? How can I return a status of 204? Well, just like everything else, Django REST frameworks has already thought about that. And what we can do is we can say from REST framework dot status. I want to import, and it gives me all of the different types of HTTP status response that I can return. All right. But currently the one that I really want is going to be the 204 so that I don't return any content. So that's going to allow me to set that status into my response. So now if I come down to my response here on line 47, I can say HTTP 204, no content. Okay, let's look at what that looks like from the terminal. Currently my level is 38. When I send this, what do you guys think will populate here in the request? I mean, in the response?
Nothing.
No data. No
Yeah,
response.
absolutely nothing, right? Because I sent back an HTTP status of 204. So now let's send it. There's absolutely nothing there. And if I hover over here to the status, we can see 204, no content. So the server successfully processed the request, but is not returning any content. That's good. So that tells me that my request was successful. So now what I can say is, well, let's pretend that we're back in the front end, right? We send this Axios put request. Well, now I can say something like, well, dot then, take in response. And then I can say, well, if resp.status is equal to 204, then what I would want to do is, well, essentially I would just want to change the content for the Pokemon card. All right, let's say that it was showing up a Pokemon card with all this information. Well, after I know that the response was successful by checking if the status was 204, I can just update the Pokemon card to reflect this information. And that's how the front end would handle that. Okay, at this point, does anyone have any questions about the put method thus far?
You said we're going to go into the serializer?
Yeah, we will go into the serializer here shortly. What was
I'm
the
sorry,
other
can you go
question?
back to the models?
Of course.
I think my model is written a little bit differently than yours. Oh, I think I followed the README instead of the video. So level up, okay. And then not so good. Okay, good. Thank you.
Of course.
Why'd you return the 204 instead of returning the rest of the content?
Yeah, so the reason why I returned the 204 instead of returning the rest of the content is because my front-end developer, or let's say I am the front-end developer, right? I don't really need to know all of the information being spit back at me. Because essentially all I would do in returning this response, I would just return all this information right back at him, saying, hey, all of this was updated. Like, you did good. Thank you for the request, right? So then at that point, I'm just repeating the process, one, and two, I'm just making my actual request heavier than what it needs to be. So instead, I'm sending back a 204, and that will let my developer know, or the front-end developer or myself know, okay, well, this request was successful. So now because it was successful, he can just handle everything in the front end rather than trying to grab things out of my response and then plugging them into the front end. He knows the behavior that's supposed to be coming back and how to update it himself in the front end. And that's the reason why you would send back an empty request of 204. If it were to fail, it would just send back a 500 error. Does that answer your question, Roger?
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Francisco, I apologize. My internet just went out and I had to reboot Zoom, but did you have to import anything to be able to use that HTTP status?
I did, yes. I had to go into REST framework and grab status.
There it is.
And then grab
Got it.
HTTP.
Thank
Okay, perfect. Seems like there are no other questions. So before we break out into our little group sessions, I want to make sure that I covered the serializer. Initially, it was supposed to be taught later on in this lesson, but now that we're here, and because of the refactoring that we did, we'll go ahead and run over it right now. So before, as we saw in our views have to do something like JSON.loads, and then we have to say serialize and all that good stuff, right? Now we did that on purpose to kind of show you what the pain of working without a serializer is and what exactly Django REST framework is providing for you. Well, if I go over to the serializers.py file, and everybody should have this, I can see how the serializer is working. Well, the serializer is coming from REST frameworks, and I'm importing just the entire serializers, and then I'm importing my model, the Pokemon.model. So now basically what I'm saying here is I'm creating a class named Pokemon Serializer, and then I'm grabbing serializers.model serializer, and that's just coming straight from Django REST framework. And what this is doing is it's telling this class, hey, your entire purpose in life is going to be to set up data in a nice and clean format so that we can send users information back and forth that we grab from the model, right? So here we have this moves. And remember that we have a many-to-many field. Well, in moves for many-to-many field, we can't just do something like serialize the moves and then call the move serializer here, because this is many-to-many. Once we go later on into making a foreign key connection, I'll go over how you could just grab another serializer from another class. But instead what we did here is we created this method called def get moves. Now these two have to match up. Moves has to match here, and this get moves is going to be triggered by this serializer method part. So it's going to look for a get method that has moves connected to it. And then after that, it's going to take in the instance. So that's a Pokemon instance. It's going to access that instance, enter moves, and then enter all of the moves connected to it. All right, just kind of like how we did before. But now instead of just serializing all of it, it's just going to grab all of the names and return a specific name for each one of them. And then after that, it's going to return that list of moves. This model here, this class meta, is what specifies what this model serializer is for. So I can specify the model is for Pokemon. I can specify the fields that I want to access. So I want ID, name, level, and moves. And when you guys take a look here, if I send this GET request over to this URL, well, Blastoise comes back with those exact fields, comes back with an ID, name, level, and moves. Well, how did I implement that with my get method, right? Let's take a look at the views here. If I scroll over to my get of a single Pokemon right here, we can see that I grab a Pokemon instance, whether that be by ID or name. And then afterwards, all I do is I call that serializer that I created, and I pass in the Pokemon as an argument. So that's going to automatically say, hey, here is the argument. It's going to analyze the model, and it's going to grab these fields from that model. It's going to format them all nice. Well, after it formats them nice and clean for me, I can send back .data, and that's what actually sends back this clean dictionary that I see here of ID 3, Blastoise, level 39, and then the list of moves. I know it's a lot to take in, and unfortunately we weren't able to get a formal lesson on it. So we'll definitely touch up on it as we continue working on with these classes. Okay. At this point, are there any questions over anything that we've gone over this morning?
Is the meta like a Dunder method, like the string Dunder method, or no?
Yeah, so that meta class is actually just special to this serializer model. And basically what this meta class is doing is it's telling that model serializer model exactly what model it's supposed to take care of and what fields it's supposed to provide for me. Does that answer your question, Roger? Okay, perfect.
Francisco, did you say that the function name get moves is directly related to the variable name moves, and they cannot be different?
That's correct. So you have to name this moves so that when this serialized method field gets triggered, it looks for a def.get. It's going to analyze all the def.gets that are def gets that are listed here, right? But the one it's going to care about is the one that matches moves after that underscore get. And that's the one that will be triggered whenever it makes this moves field. And then this moves field is what gets rendered by fields moves.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? Okay, it doesn't seem like there are any other questions. In total today, so far what we've gone over is just the put method. Later on today, we're going to be going over the post and delete methods. But I think it's a good time to take a little break, and let's come back here in exactly 8 minutes. So currently right now it's 10:02. I'll see everyone at 10:10. All right, so we all just got a chance to replicate the same behavior for the move app. If I go over to the move app and I check out the views, we can see I have a way to get a move by utilizing the get method. So now I can just do my def put. It's going to take in the same things where it's going to take in self, request. It's going to take in name. I can basically just copy this line here to be able to grab that specific move. Okay, so now that I have that move, what do I want to do here? Well, I want to make sure that this, I want to grab the information from the request.data. I think I need the PP, which will be the request.data.get PP. And I think it was power as well, right? Power, which is going to be request.data.get power. And then the last one was accuracy. Is that correct? Okay, silence. I'll take it.
Yes, it is correct. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay. So that should get me all three of those things, or all three of those informations. So now I could create methods if I wanted to, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do it here. So if PP, so if it's not none, then I'm going to say move.pp is equal to move.pp +1. Or actually, I think I could just say plus equals 1. in this case.
Is this to change the stuff for a move we already have the name of?
Could you explain that a little bit?
Like you put move.objects.get, like, so do we already have that in our database?
Yeah, so there's already a move called Psychic in our database that we can work with. We don't have anything else in our database just yet.
Okay, and so we're just updating the PP power and accuracy of that move.
Correct.
Okay.
How would we add a new move?
That will be on the post method, and we will go over that right after break. So basically here, all I'm saying is if it is in the request, then I'm going to go ahead and add one. So I'm just going to make this true or false variables for now. And then I'm going to say move.save. So that should accomplish everything. And then finally, I can just return. And honestly, instead of doing all of these, what I can do is I can just do it here. Okay, and then I can return a response. And what I want here is from REST framework.status import HTTP 204. Oh, hello. Want this in lowercase. Okay, and that should do the trick. Let me check that my server is still running real quick. Looks
Should
like
we
my
add the
server
full
is
clean to
running.
it?
I can add the full clean to it, yes. But if I add the full clean to it, the entire thing will fail. So if I want to add the full clean method to it, then I need to place it in here. Oh, that didn't work the way I wanted it to. That's weird. Okay, so that will get me the full clean method and then save it for each individual one of them. Okay, so now everything's running correctly from what I can see. So now if I go on Postman, I believe the endpoint is moves. And the move that I have is Psychic. So now as far as this goes, well, I can say that I want to increase PP power and accuracy. So let's say PP, that's going to be true. Power is going to be true. And then finally, accuracy, which is also going to be true. Okay, so now I can send that put request. Well, actually, let me send the get first so I can make sure that this is working correctly. Okay, yeah, so it gets me the individual move there. So now let's send that put request so I can see power and accuracy get increased. Okay, it comes back with an HTTP 204. And now when I see, we can see power and accuracy were both increased. Okay, that was fast, but I hope that was able to answer whatever question it is that you had, Kelvin. Did that address your question by any chance?
I'm not sure which question.
You said you wanted me to show you how to do it. So did that work out for you?
Yeah, that did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions?
Do we go into a more practical way of without doing the full clean, or is it just like known term that you probably wouldn't pass it anyway?
Yeah, we could definitely go into a more practical way that has to do with serializers, and we'll go into that later on in the course. I don't think we'll have enough time to go over it today from what I can see.
Okay, no worry. I just saw, like, by the way you're typing it, saying it wasn't gonna work. I was like, okay, there's got to be a different method or an easier way to do that.
Oh, because I kept putting it over and over again.
Yeah.
Well, it's because each one of these needs to be able to handle their own validations. You get what I mean? So if I put it at the very end, two of these could pass, and then if the last one doesn't pass, it would throw a full clean, but then these two wouldn't be saved on there. So if these two do pass, I do want them to reflect onto the database, and if the one that doesn't meet that argument is the one that should throw the error. So that's why we have to do it at each individual kind of code block.
Doesn't full clean implement save?
I can check. I honestly mostly did this out of precaution. But I may have to check that and get back to you. Didn't come prepared for the full clean questions this morning. All right. At this point right now, it's 11:01. We still have to practice post and delete methods. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back at 11:11 to pick up the lecture. Hopefully everyone's back. All right, welcome back, everyone. The next things that we're going to be going over is going to be the create and delete methods. So let's go back to our read real quick. So far we've gone over the post and put, we've gone over the get and put, but now the next thing that we're going to go over is creating. I think somebody asked about a question about that as well. I'm sure you guys noticed that so far in your moves under Pokemon, you only have one move. Well, after we do this exercise this evening, you're going to be able to create as many moves as you would like. But let's go over what type of method correlates with create. Well, when I make a post or something's going on the database, I'm posting something onto a database. So what kind of method do we think correlates with create?
Post.
Post. Yeah. So it would be a post method, right? So we could put a post method here. And then the status that would be returned with a post method, well, a post method is creating something. So when it creates something, we expect it to return a 201 status code. And that stands for created, which we'll see here shortly. So now let's go back over to the views and let's create our Pokemon. So now this create or post method isn't going to go under the a Pokemon view. I'm creating a Pokemon, right? Which means I need to do this on the all Pokemon view. So I'm going to go ahead and create this post method. And this post method, again, is going to take in self and request and nothing else. Okay, so this original part of my post method, of my get method, I apologize up here, it's just grabbing all of the Pokemon, it's ordering them by one, serializing them, and then returning that in a JSON response. But I want to be able to create a Pokemon. We know that we don't want to use a long URL that would pass in all the Pokemon fields that I need. So instead, I'm going to use request.data. So let's go over the fields that I may need. So it looks like I'm going to need a name for sure. Accuracy has a default. Power is good. PP is, oh, this is the moves, of course. Let me fix that real quick. All right. So it looks like we do need a name. We don't need a level if we don't want to provide a level. We don't need a date encountered or a date captured. And the description, we'll have to provide the description because of this validator that we gave it. We gave it a minimum of 25. If we try to utilize the default of unknown, this is obviously going to fail. So we'll have to actually supply the description. So there has a default equals false, and then we don't really need to know any moves. Okay, so it looks like the only two fields that we need to send for sure are the name and the description. Well, let's add the level in there just to have an extra thing. Okay, so now let's grab that. let's say, well, I want to grab the name that's going to be equal to request.data because we know that that's returning the dictionary. I'm going to run the get method to name. Okay. If I want to grab the description, how could I grab that from request.data?
Same way you did right now, but with the description.
Yeah, so request.data.get, then I would just pass in description, all right? And now the last thing that I want to grab is level, so I can grab that from request.data.get. And what key am I looking for here? Oh, no. Yeah, that would be a weird one.
Level.
Yeah, so here I would be looking for level. Okay, so now I have the 3 fields that I need to be able to create a Pokemon. And we've done creating a Pokemon through the Python shell before, but now we're actually doing it on a Python file. So we could just name this new Pokemon. And this is OOP. I'm working with the Pokemon instance. So how do I make a new instance of Pokemon?
Pokemon with a capital P.
Okay.
And the pass set name, description, and label.
Yeah, so I could say name is equal to name, description is equal to description, and then level is equal to level. All right. So that's grabbing all of the information. Okay. So then finally, I can say new Pokemon dot full clean. That's going to check my Pokemon, right? And then right after that, I can save the Pokemon. Okay, so that's going to save it. It's going to handle any type of validation errors. It's going to check everything to ensure everything's working properly. So now finally, I could either return the entire Pokemon, or I could just say, hey, created was successful by saying created equals true, right? That's really up to me what it is that I want to return to the user. But in this case, let's go ahead and return a serialized data so that we could go over serializers a little bit. So let's say serialized Pokemon. And then what we'll put here is Pokemon Serializer. It's going to expect an instance of a Pokemon. So now I can pass in new Pokemon. Oh, and I don't know why I put that in parentheses rather than setting it to an equal sign. Okay. And now finally, I'm gonna actually print this so that we can all see what the serializer looks like when I send this request. But this doesn't pertain to what we're actually going to see here, so please don't worry about adding this to your code. This has nothing to do with the functionality of the post request. This is just so we can visualize what the serializer looks like. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and return a response. And what kind of response do we want to return here?
Was it 201?
Yeah, we want a 201, all right? So let's go ahead and say status, and then we want HTTP. Well, I don't have 201, apparently, from what I was able to see. So where can I import 201 from?
Back up at the top after
From
HTTP 204 no content.
Right. So it's coming from the statuses. Perfect. So now I can say 201 created. We can return 201 created. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to do is I actually want to return the serialized Pokemon. And I want to return something called data, because that's the information that I want to grab out of the serializer is the data. Just like we have request.data, once the data once the body has been serialized, well, right now I want to return the data of the serialized Pokemon because that's what it's actually able to be in exchange between HTTP request. So now let's take a look at what that looks like.
Francisco.
Yeah.
Why are you returning it here, but you didn't return it on the other method we just did?
Yeah, I don't have to return it. This is just purely just to demonstrate. I could change this to just say created true, or if I don't want this 201 is expecting a body, right? And that's because when it comes to post requests and creating something new, that's something that the user should definitely get a confirmation for. Not just the user, but the front end developers. Now, when I'm utilizing put request, that doesn't necessarily need something that's that drastic because it's not such a drastic change, right? But because I'm creating something brand new inside of my database, that's when I want to make sure that I send back some type of content in my response. Does that make sense, Roger?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's take a look here. I'm going to go ahead and ping Pokemon. And what kind of method do I want to send to that request?
Post.
Yeah, I want to send a post method. And let's look at the data I'm looking for. So it looks like I'm looking for name, description, and level. So how do I create that JSON object with name, description, and level?
Would it be the same way as the way you just deleted?
Yeah, I would just say name, all right? So in this case, let's just do Geodude. For description, or actually we could just do level next. For level, let's say that he's a really high level, but we just never let him evolve. So let's go with 45. And then the last one is description. And this, oh, this should be a text. So this is Geodude. And eventually you can evolve into Graveler if we let it. And I actually don't remember how to turn them into the next one, but we'll see. All right. So there we go. We have all the name fields. We have the level field and the description that we're looking for so that that's matching. So it's matching the name, description, and level. And then it's passing it into our Pokemon API. Okay. So now let's go ahead and send this request and see what happens with the behavior. Okay, so we see that my behavior came back, or my Geodude came back. I can see he has the ID of 5, meaning he's the new Pokemon that's been saved with the ID of 5. I can see his level is 45, and the name is Geodude. Well, now let's go back here and let's take a look at what the serializer looks like real quick. So the first print statement, that just prints the Pokemon serializer with the object that I passed into it. So here we can see it's a Pokemon serializer, and it tells me exactly what class I passed in it. Well, I passed Geodude is yet to be called into it. So this is just my dunder method. All right. And then it gives me the fields that I specify for it. Well, it tells me that the ID field, it just tells me what it's looking for, right? And it tells me kind of the model fields that it's specifically looking for, but it doesn't tell me their actual values. Well, when I utilize .data here on the second print statement, that's where I'm able to see the values corresponding to Geodude. Returns a dictionary with ID 5, name Geodude, and the level 45. Okay. At this point, does anyone have any questions or what we just gone over for sending a post request and creating something onto our database?
Can I see your Postman real quick?
Of course.
Can we, oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say mine is saying method posts not allowed.
Same.
Yeah, if you're getting that method post not allowed, I guess I would have to ask, did you create a post method here?
Yep.
Okay.
Same.
And then that post method is under the
Oh, wait.
class of all Pokemon?
Okay. Yep, it wasn't under all Pokemon. Thank you.
Of course, no problem. Yeah, we got to remember that that route. So if you get something like that and you get some weird behavior, kind of trace it from the beginning, right? So go to URLs and look at the URL that you're pinging. In this case, we're not pinging an integer or string. or we're not pinging the ID or name variable. What we're pinging is just the empty path of Pokemon. So I know that the Pokemon class or the view class of all Pokemon is the one that's supposed to be treating this request. So now when I go to views, I know that I want to add my post method to the all Pokemon class-based view. All right. Any other questions?
Hey,
Yeah,
so oh man, go ahead.
No, dude, go ahead.
All right. Hey, Francisco, did you say that we're not allowed to specify empty default values, even if they're specified in our models?
What do you mean? No, we could definitely specify them. Just because we gave it a default doesn't mean that we can't overwrite them, right? Like for example, I passed them level in this request, and that's why I was able to add 45 because that's
Well,
the
no, I'm
value
saying,
that I gave it to it.
can we leave level? Can we omit in the request level 45?
Yeah,
And
you
it would
can.
set it the default one. Okay.
The only one that we didn't, or that we weren't able to do that for was description, and that's because unknown does not fit our validator of 25.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Ivan, I know you had a question before. Kelvin,
Yeah,
do you want to shoot?
Yeah, I was getting a not allowed, and then same issue was I just had to indent it left. I'm getting some other errors that I think I'll just need to reconcile on my own. It's the ID field, so it's not allowing me to post without the it needs to have an ID value for an ID before the many to relationship can be used. So I think it's just something probably within my model.
I think you're utilizing the old exercise and you're not utilizing the new exercise example. That's where you're getting that unexpected behavior.
Got it. I'll go back to it. Thanks.
Of course. All right. So now at this point, we were able to create a new method. And now the very last thing that we want to do is go over the delete method. So let's come back to this README real quick. So delete is actually pretty simple. So one, it's supposed to interact with my database, and we know that it's supposed to delete something from my database. So it should come over through a delete request. Now, what kind of response do we think that we need to correlate with delete request?
.404.
Yeah, so a 404 would be not found, right? Which means that the request or whatever action it is that I'm trying to do would fail. The status code that I would want to return here would be a 204. And the reason why I want to return a 204 is because there's really nothing that I can tell you at this point. Like the item has been deleted. So if the item has been deleted, what am I supposed to, I guess I could send back a string that says, hey, this item was deleted. But it's not really necessary when the individual developer can just check for the status code to come back as 204. All right. So now let's go over that. I want to be able to delete a specific Pokemon. So if I want to be able to delete a specific Pokemon, what kind of URL pattern do we think I would use? Would I use the one that pings all Pokemon, or would I use the one that pings one specific Pokemon here?
A Pokemon, one specific.
Yeah, I would ping the one that pings one specific Pokemon. Okay, so with that said, I know that my delete request is supposed to go under a_Pokemon. So now I can go over to my views. I see that I have a get method, I have a put method, but I don't have a delete method. So let's fix that real quick. Okay, I indent myself. I can go ahead and say def delete. My delete is supposed to take in self, a request, and then it's supposed to take in an integer or name. Oh, sorry, ID or name. That's what I named it. Okay, the next part is just getting a Pokemon, right? And for getting a Pokemon, well, I can utilize the same exact information here that I've already built a couple of times to be able to grab one. And this way I know that by the end of this, Pokemon will have a specific value. Okay. So now the very last thing. well, I have this Pokemon instance, but how do I delete it from the database?
Like a delete,
Yeah,
query.
just like we have a Pokemon dot save, right? We also have a Pokemon dot delete, and that will automatically delete it from the database. So right after that's done, all I would return is a response of 204. So let's see, I return a response. Oh, that's not a response. Hello. All right. And then what kind of status would this have?
204.
Yeah, so then we go HTTP 204. Okay. So it's gonna go through, grab a specific Pokemon, and then delete it. So let's see how that works. We just created Geodude, so I think it makes sense to delete Geodude. And we could look up Geodude by either name or by their ID. So just to keep things simple, I'm gonna do things by ID. Okay, so if I send a post request, I know that I'm gonna get, hey, this method's not allowed. So let's try it out. Okay, I get a method's not allowed. Why is that? Can anybody tell me why I'm getting this method's not allowed for a post request?
That ID is already used.
That's close. Yeah, it's not necessarily that the ID is already used. It's the fact that the A Pokemon API view does not have a post method, right? It only has a get, a put, and a delete method. But because it does not have a post method, it tells me that that method is not allowed. Does that make sense?
I want to look underneath the all Pokemons for the post method.
Yeah, so if I wanted to do the all Pokemons, I would have to ping a different URL where it's just an empty path because that's the ones that connects to all Pokemon.
So just by putting that extra character at the end of the 5 or the name is going to make it go to the other URL.
Correct.
And that's set in our URLs file.
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
So that's because when I go over here, if I go to my URLs file, once I add that name or integer, it's only pinging a Pokemon. All right. So now we experimented with this. I can run a get request just to be able to get Geodude's information. So we see Geodude's information comes back. At this point, the body doesn't matter. I no longer need it. I can send that request and Geodude still comes back. I don't need to send a put request. Now the very last thing I need to send is my delete request. Okay, so when I send this, what do I expect the body of the response to have? So let's say
204.
Yeah, so that's a status that I expected to return, a 204, right? But does that mean that my response will have a body or will it just be empty?
Gonna be empty. No
Yeah.
content.
Perfect. So now when I send this request, I see, okay, my body is empty. If I go into the status, I see that it's coming back with 204 no content. So let's confirm that that happened. I'm gonna go ahead and run a get request to all Pokemon so I can see all the Pokemon that are in my database. I can see I have Blastoise, I have Charizard, I have Eevee and Pikachu, but Geodude is no longer in my database anymore. And I can also confirm that by running my SQL query here. I can say select all from Pokemon. Oh, hello. And I can see I have Pikachu, Charizard, Eevee, and Blastoise, but I don't have anything else. Something important to note here is notice how after we ran the put request to Blastoise, Blastoise went from being third in the order here to being the very last one. So just keep that in mind whenever you're working with requests. If you want consistency, sometimes you might have to sort your data in a specific manner so that it's all coming back the same way. Okay. At this point, does anyone have any questions over any of the CRUDing methods that we've gone over today? Everyone feel pretty confident with CRUD? Jesse's just shaking her head. That's not good. Okay, so what questions do we have in that case? We probably just need some practical application at this point before we can even have any questions, right?
Actually, Francisco, actually, every time we respond some status, like what's that used for? It's not no any content, it's just a status. What do we use that for? The status.
This status here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this status is saying what kind of response it is that we want to send. And these HTTP methods are just what correlates to each individual method of sending a specific request. So for example, the status of 204, well, we know that that's either a delete request or a put request, right? If it's 200, it's either going to be a get or a put request. And if it's a post, then we should only receive 201s. That's just the standard for how we talk through the web and what type of status codes it is that you're supposed to return. And when you build an API for a specific site or anyone, they would expect each one of these codes or statuses to be part of the response whenever they're pinging these specific methods, all right? A really bad API would just return status 200s for everything. You wouldn't want that type of behavior because then it wouldn't follow the RESTful API kind of construct. Does that make sense, Zekun?
Yep, thanks.
Of course.
So what's the status gonna be if it's already deleted? For example, if you want to run the same same thing like with the 5, if you're trying to delete the same thing, but it doesn't exist anymore, what kind of request you want to send it back instead of 204?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let's say we wanted to send this status again, right? Well, this doesn't exist anymore, so we would expect this to throw out a 404 error. And that's actually going to go into the next portion of the lesson, which is going to be at this point just refactoring our code, right? I want to make sure that I refactor this code. And I want to talk about how exactly it is that I can clean it up. Well, up here, I don't really see anything that I can clean up necessarily, but I do see a lot of commonality inside my get a method, right? Or a Pokemon. I can see that I continuously, in every single one of these methods, I call Pokemon equals none, and then I look for a Pokemon. So let's isolate this behavior real quick. Let's grab this. I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to make a method for the Pokemon for the A Pokemon class. I apologize. So I'm going to say def get a Pokemon, and this is just a method, right? It's just regular Python, has nothing to do with any type of request. It's just a method. I can name it whatever I want, but it does need to take in self. And in this case, I know that the other thing that I'm going to need will be the ID or name. So let's just say identifier. Okay. So now the next thing I could say is if identifier, or actually I can start everything here. And let's clean this up a little bit. Instead of doing this ID or name, well, I know this is going to come back to be numeric, right? So I can say if identifier, and what I can do is check the type. And then if that type is equal to an integer, then this behavior will get triggered. And I can just highlight both of these to say identifier. Okay, so once that's done, I can just return the individual Pokemon, right? Let me take a look here and see if we're always serializing. We're not always serializing the Pokemon, so this is where we would cut it off, just to return the Pokemon. Okay. Now, this works as far as cleaning that part up, and we'll see how we can plug it in here shortly. But now the question rises where, what if they're looking for a specific Pokemon and that Pokemon doesn't exist, right? Well, Django has thought of that, and they've made this shortcut called get object for 404. So let's grab that. we're gonna say from Django dot shortcuts. We're gonna import get object or 404. And what this is going to do is it's going to look inside of the model, whichever one that is. It's going to ping our database and it's going to say, okay, well, I'm looking for this object that meets the following conditions. If one is returned, then it's going to return that, and that's what we'll utilize. But if none are returned, it's going to automatically throw a 404 error. So let's see what that will look like here. So we're going to do Pokemon is equal to get object or 404. It's going to take in the Pokemon model because that's the first argument. It's saying, what model do you want me to look into? And then the second argument is what conditions are to be met. So in this case, I'll say ID is equal to identifier. And I'll repeat the same thing here. But rather than ID, what I want to check is the name to be equal to identifier. And I believe I want to use title here. And then after that, I'll return the Pokemon. Okay. Well, this is all great as far as saying it. And before I plug it into the individual methods, I would like to know if anyone has any questions over how we built this method, what it's doing, and then what exactly is get object or 404 doing for us.
Probably all those things you just listed off. I need a little clarification, specifically what it's doing.
Yeah, definitely. We could do kind of like a touch up on everything.
Can I see your import too?
Yeah, let me just paste it right here. So it's from Django.shortcuts import get object. Oh, hello, I can spell. 404. Okay. So now this DEF method, this is just making a method that belongs to the class. It doesn't have anything to do with any type of get request or put request or anything like that. This is just a method that I'm creating. This is still just a class that I can create methods for. It's taking in an identifier, which is what it's going to use to look for a specific Pokemon instance later on. I know that I'm going to want to return a Pokemon, so I'm making it equal to none so that I have access to it at any point. After that, I'm going to check the type of the identifier. We know that my string is returning, we know that my URL will return either an integer or a string. So if this is an integer, I want to grab a Pokemon by ID. But if that ID that I'm looking for does not exist for any of my Pokemon, I want to throw a 404 error, a 404 error, saying, hey, this object does not exist. And the same thing on my else statement. If it's not an integer, I want to grab a Pokemon by the name. Now the user could put the name in whatever order they want, because by utilizing .title, I'm going to format that Pokemon name in the correct way so that I can look for it. Now, if it doesn't find any Pokemon that share that name, it's going to throw a 404 error. And then afterwards, if all of this is successful and at no point it threw a 404 error, it would return the Pokemon instance. Does that make sense to everyone? I see some head nods and some thumbs up. Okay, perfect. So now let's go into plugging it in, right? So now in this case, instead of saying Pokemon is equal to all that information, I would just erase that. And I would say self.get a Pokemon, because that's the method that I created for the class. We know self is the identifier that I passed first. But now I'm looking for identifier. What would identifier be when I pass it into line 47?
ID or name.
Perfect. Yeah, so I would say ID or name. now I can grab this specific line and I could just plug it in everywhere where I did that. So here I did it again. In Command V. And finally here, I did it for a third time. Okay, so I just refactored, right? I kind of cleaned up a little bit and cleaned up my code. There's still kind of a little bit of a code smell, but no biggie so far. My server is running, so let's make sure everything's still working correctly. Let's look for a Pokemon with the ID of 1. Okay, so it looks like that's not working correctly. So I must have messed something up at some point. Okay, so I'm saying if the object has no attribute named title. So I sent back 1. So it looks like this if statement here didn't work. So maybe I have to do something like this. There you go. So rather than calling the method where I'm doing this if statement, I would just say the type of integer. Okay, so that returned Pikachu. Well, now what happens if I want to look up a Pokemon by name? Well, let's say I look up for Eevee. Okay, so that worked as well. It sent Eevee, and because I utilized .title, it was able to format Eevee correctly. And it gave back my Pokemon. All right, and then finally, to answer the question, well, what about a Pokemon that doesn't exist? We know we just erased Geodude. So let's type in Geodude here and try to send this GET request. Well, now we're getting a detail, not found. And if we look at the status code, it's coming back as 404, not found. Because Geodude is no longer in my database, so that GET object or 404 is triggered and sends back a 404 response. Okay, any questions?
Can you go back to the views?
Of course. Is this what you want to see?
Yes, thanks.
All right. The very last thing that we want to touch up on today, it's going to be kind of making our API a little bit more flexible. So currently right now, when I send this name request, we know that the request.data is a dictionary. And I'm sure we remember the star method from OOP. Well, if request.data is coming back with all of this information, rather than grabbing this information by hand, what I can do is I can comment it all out. And instead of specifying the keys and description, what I can do is say star request.data. So what that's going to do is it's going to unpack my dictionary. So my dictionary right now should have something along the lines of name, and then it'll have Geodude, obviously in a string, and then it'll have description, the description, and then finally it will have level, and then have the level. Well, what this star method is doing is it's going to say, okay, well, what does Pokemon field need? Well, Pokemon field needs a name in order to be created. So I'm looking for a name. So this star method is going to go into the request.data, see if there's a key of name, and wherever that key of name is located, it will return the value of Geodude corresponding to it. If we send description, well, the model needs description. That's what we have there. So then the star method will go into the dictionary, find the key of description, and then pass in the appropriate value that matches that key. And so on throughout the dictionary. This is going to make my API a little bit more flexible. And that'll allow me to save both time for me to code. And two, it kind of forces the individual sending the code to ensure that they're sending the correct parameters. So let's take a look at what that looks like now. So I still have my Geodude here. I know I want to send a post request, and I want to send that post request to just Pokemon. So let's see what this looks like. Okay, when I click this send. Okay, so it creates my Geodude. Gives it the ID of 6 because the ID of 5 was from the old Geodude that I deleted. Gives it the name Geodude, the level of 45, and everything was created appropriately without me having to necessarily grab each individual field from request.data. Okay, so in conclusion, today we've gone over all of the CRUD methods, the corresponding HTTP responses to them, building each individual method corresponding to each class to handle each type of request, and then just building general class methods that we can utilize to refactor our code and ensure that we're not repeating ourselves. Does anyone have any questions over anything that we've covered today?
Sorry, where did the Geodude get the 6 level from? Okay.
Yeah, so the Geodude didn't get a level 6, it got an ID of level 6. So let's take a look at SQL here.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Let's take a look at SQL here. I run my select here. And we can see I have Pikachu, I have my Charizard, my Eevee, and my Blastoise, right? But before we added this very last Geodude, we had to send a post request that occupied the number 5. Once we deleted that, yeah, the ID of 5 is no longer there. But Postgres only treats things incrementally. So even though that was deleted, the next thing that I create will have the following ID of 6 rather than 5 because it had been occupied. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, definitely. So it's not like smart key to the ID of 6. It's whatever we put in would get that. That makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions?
To your views file?
Which one of my
The one we were just in, yeah. So I have a very basic question that kind of goes way back. I just forgot about like what exactly self is doing again. For some reason I like brain farted. Like why do you have to pass in self or like that get a Pokemon function? Like what is it doing exactly? I think I just forgot exactly what that's doing.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good question. So self is just basically saying any type of class method, the very first argument that it needs to take, and we can see all of them are taking it, right? Any type of every single class method that we make, the first argument that it takes is self, and that's in reference to the class. So it's saying that the object that belongs to this class can access this method. So that's why down here on line 44, when I go to get a Pokemon, I can say self dot, and by saying self, it's saying, okay, well, this is something that belongs to the class. So anything in this class is available to me. And then I say get a Pokemon method. And that's what gets this method going. Does that
So
answer?
is that referring to API view that you passed into a Pokemon?
It is not referring to API view, it's referring to a Pokemon.
Okay. So it's just referring to the class.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got a real easy one. So before we started all this CRUD stuff, we were using .content to get the data, and now we're using .data. Is that because we're messing with the front end that we use .data instead of .content?
Are you talking about yesterday when we were messing with a third-party API?
Even before that, I think we're using like .content to get into stuff. It might have been yesterday though. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so yesterday specifically, the reason why we were messing with .content is because the request wasn't handled by Django REST frameworks. It was handled by the request library. And what we were treating wasn't the request itself, we were treating the response. So yesterday we were utilizing request to send a GET request to the noun project. And then the noun project was sending back a response to us that only had a .content inside of it and did not have .data. That's why we had to utilize the .json to be able to turn it into JSON readable. It's just the fact that that API was sending back a response and we're working with a response. In this case today, we're working with a request and we're doing it with Django REST frameworks, which gives us access to request.data. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Go ahead and give me a second here. If we could take a 5-minute break, I have to make sure that the rest of the staff is tracking on something. And then right after that, after those 5 minutes, we can go ahead and go on with the remainder of our day. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.